Listening Library presents The Zodiac Legacy, Convergence, by Stan Lee and Stuart Moore. Read for you by Feodor Chin.
Dedicated to everyone who loves fantasy and high adventure via tales that titillate and thrill the imagination. When you think about it, isn't that really all of us? SL. For Liz, SM. For Steph, Zoe, and Bubba too, AT. Part 1. Convergence. Chapter 1. There was something odd about the tour guide. She was tall, with long hair, and she seemed to know a lot about Chinese history, as she should, working in a museum. But as Stephen Lee listened to her, he couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't quite what she seemed. The new China Heritage Museum first opened 5 years ago, the guide said. It was designed to resemble a traditional Chinese quadrangle house, with several buildings surrounding a central courtyard. Stephen raised his hand. Mr. Singh, the teacher, nodded to him. Was it always planned to be a museum? Stephen asked. Yes, the guide replied. She seemed distracted. Her eyes darted quickly around the room. No. Maybe. I think it was supposed to be a hotel. Stephen frowned. A hotel? That didn't sound right. And the guide didn't sound very sure of herself. The rest of the class just nodded. Stephen looked around the room. Its high walls were covered with intricate wooden carvings, stained glass windows, and stylized artwork depicting ancient peasants with their oxen. A couple of large Buddha statues stood in the center of the room. The earliest books were manufactured in China, the guide said, gesturing toward a glass case. Even before the invention of paper, writing was printed on materials like bone, wood, and, She trailed off. Stephen's friend Hirani stepped forward. And what? She asked. The guide had pulled out her phone and stood frowning at it. Plastic. Mr. Sin cocked his head. Excuse me, ma'am. Did you say plastic? Did I? She smiled distantly. That's silly, of course. I meant, aluminum foil. That's definitely not right, Stephen thought. This woman is way off script, Hirani whispered, leaning in close to Stephen. Her dark hair was pulled back from her face, and she wore a bright orange sweater. I know, right? Stephen replied. And what's she doing now? The guide was jabbing at her phone's screen, shaking her head. Hirani smiled. Maybe she's waiting for a better job offer. Then he noticed the guide's name tag. It read, Jumon. Stephen frowned. The woman sounded Chinese, but the name didn't. Then again, Stephen looked Chinese, and his name was American, a fact that had surprised a few of the locals in Hong Kong on this very trip. Ryan, a friendly kid with red hair, pushed in between Stephen and Hirani. Hey, Lee, Ryan said. You see this? Ryan pointed at a display case. Inside it, a very old printed book stood propped open. A few Chinese characters ran down the side, but the page was dominated by an old-style etching, a stylized drawing of a man in robes shooting some kind of lightning out of his hand. Stephen blinked. We've been over this, Ryan. I don't know what everything here says, he said. Well, I know, dude, but it's not that. The guy in the drawing, he looks like a crazy superhero. He looks like that guy, Hirani said. She pointed at Stephen's chest. Stephen looked from the book down to the image on his T-shirt. It showed a dark-skinned man in metallic armor, his hand crackling with energy. Stephen looked up at Hirani in disbelief. You mean the steel mongoose? He asked. She shrugged. You've never heard of the steel mongoose? Stephen continued. African adventurer Bob Mugabe, who found himself critically injured and built a high-tech exoskeleton that gives him the powers of a cute but deadly wild animal? Is he in comic books? Hirani asked. No. Maybe. I don't know. He only starred in Steel Mongoose 3, the top-grossing film of last year. It was playing on the flight. I like poetry, she said. Then Harani looked past him and grimaced. Stephen turned to see Mr. Singh glaring at them from a few feet away. We better cool it, Harani whispered. Ryan laughed. You and your heroes, Lee. They're not real, you know. Harani and Ryan moved off. Stephen lingered behind for a moment, staring at the book in the case. The strange image of the man with the lightning bolts seemed to stare back at him, as if it were speaking to him through the ages. Hey, Lee, Ryan called. Take a look at this. Stephen crossed over to the wall. Ryan had stopped next to a big empty case with a sign reading, in English and Chinese, Exhibit removed for repairs. Sucks, huh? Ryan said. This thing must be 15 feet tall. Stephen peered closer. Inside the case was a small cardboard stand-up with a picture of the missing exhibit. A large flat disc, etched with a series of concentric circles and lines. The lines formed hundreds of tiny boxes, each filled with one or more ancient Chinese characters. Notches studded the outer part, marked with numbers from 0 to 360. A label read, Shi Pan, Astrological Compass, circa 200 BC. My grandfather, Stephen said, he's got one of those. Well, his is a lot smaller. I think he brought it over from China. Stephen pointed. The markings are the names of stars in the sky. I like your grandpa, Ryan said. He makes those tasty little salty pea pods. Yo, we better get moving. Ryan started off after Harani and the rest of the class, who had gathered around a large Buddha statue. But Stephen hesitated. He looked around at the rugs and weathered maps covering the walls, the glass cases holding ancient pieces of bone and pottery, an exhibit of Cantonese opera showing people in bright, lavish costumes, the vast history and culture of China preserved in this place. Stephen hadn't wanted to come to Hong Kong. He liked his home in suburban Philadelphia, his big TV and his Xbox, and his Blu-ray collection of superhero movies. But his parents had insisted. You should see China, his father had said. You have to be in a place to understand it. You need to know where you came from. It must have been important, Stephen knew, because his father rarely spoke for that long. In fact, Stephen's parents weren't around much. Ever since he could remember, they'd been busy running their company, 7 days a week. But grandfather was always around, with his awesome cooking and his warm smile and his long stories about old China. I should listen to those stories more, Stephen thought. He gazed over at the class. Harani asked the guide another question. Stephen couldn't hear the answer, but some of the other kids laughed. Mr. Singh frowned, leaning forward to reprimand them gently. Standing apart from the class, Stephen suddenly felt very lonely, very much out of place. Just 2 weeks, he thought, but I'm already looking forward to getting home. He looked down at his shirt again. He stared at the determined, muscular figure of the steel mongoose, fists glowing with righteous power. Mr. Lee! Mr. Singh was glaring at him. The class was marching through a high archway into an adjacent exhibit space. Frowning, Stephen started forward to join them. Then he stopped in his tracks. The scream was quiet, so faint that Stephen could barely make it out. But it felt deep and resonant, and it penetrated right into his skull. It sounded like someone, a man or woman, Stephen couldn't tell, howling in agony. Stephen whirled around, trying to locate the source of the scream. It seemed to be coming from the far wall. 2 huge ornate rugs covered most of the wall, with a small door between them. Then the noise was gone. Stephen frowned. Did I really hear that? He wondered. He shook his head and started toward the archway, then stopped again as the scream sounded once more.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?